Did medieval women really spend their entire lives locked away, scrubbing floors and looking mournful? Were they truly powerless pawns in a world run solely by men, with no voice, no rights, and no lives beyond marriage and childbirth? For anyone picturing the European Middle Ages, roughly spanning from 500 to 1500 Common Era, the movies often paint a grim and inaccurate picture of womanhood. Number 11, medieval women were perpetually dirty and unconcerned with hygiene. The flickering torchlight and dusty castles in many films might lead you to believe that medieval people, especially women, lived in a constant state of grime, rarely washing, and certainly not caring about their appearance. The truth is quite different. Personal hygiene in the Middle Ages was perhaps not identical to modern standards, but it was certainly a common practice, and cleanliness held a significant place in daily life for many women. Bathing was a regular affair. Public bathhouses, inherited from Roman traditions, continued to thrive in many European towns and cities throughout the medieval period. These were not just places for getting clean, they were social hubs where people met, relaxed, and even conducted business. And women had their own designated times or separate facilities in these establishments. Historical records show that people in cities like Paris, London, and Florence frequently visited these bathhouses. Even in smaller towns or rural areas, private bathing was common. Noble households often had dedicated bathing chambers, complete with large wooden tubs, heated water, and even servants to assist with washing. Even among the less wealthy, a basin of water and a cloth in front of a fire was a regular ritual for washing hands and face, and a full body wash would happen in a portable tub or in a nearby stream or river, weather permitting. Soap, far from being a modern invention, was widely used. Recipes for soap, often made from animal fats or vegetable oils mixed with lye, derived from wood ash, can be found in medieval texts. These soaps were used for washing bodies, hair, and clothing. Perfumes and scented oils were also popular, especially among the wealthier classes, used to anoint the body after bathing or to scent clothing. Women of all social standings used fragrant herbs and flowers to sweeten their homes and their persons. Rosewater was a particular favorite for washing hands and faces, valued not only for its scent, but also for its perceived skin softening properties. Hair care was also a significant part of a medieval woman's routine. Long hair was admired and often elaborately styled, requiring regular washing and combing. Fine-toothed combs, made from bone, wood, or ivory, have been found in archaeological digs across medieval sites, indicating their widespread use for detangling and removing lice. Hair was often braided or wrapped, then covered by wimples, veils, or elaborate headdresses, depending on fashion and social status. This covering was not necessarily because of dirt, but often for modesty, or as a fashion statement. Oral hygiene was also practiced. While toothpaste, as we know it, did not exist, people used rough cloths to rub their teeth, and some used mixtures of herbs, ground bone, or pumice powder to clean and whiten them. Breath fresheners, often made from chewing herbs like parsley, mint, or fennel seeds, were also common. Evidence of medieval dental care, rudimentary though it was, indicates an awareness of oral health. Clothing hygiene was also important. While outer garments might not have been washed as frequently as today due to their construction and the difficulty of drying heavy fabrics like wool, undergarments made of linen were changed and washed regularly. Linen is a fiber that cleans easily and dries quickly, making it ideal for items worn close to the skin. Sumptuary laws, which dictated what different social classes could wear, often extended to the quality and cleanliness of clothing, showing that appearance and neatness were socially valued. Noble women and wealthy urban women would have had multiple changes of clothing and access to laundresses. Even peasant women, while working harder, would have sought to keep their limited garments as clean as possible. The popular image of medieval women as universally unkempt is largely a misconception born from later historical biases and a romanticized view of a dark age. Everyday life included regular attention to personal cleanliness, varying in degree with wealth and circumstance, but undeniably present and valued by women across all social strata. The surviving artifacts, legal texts, and social descriptions from the era consistently point to a society where bathing, grooming, and presentable appearance were important aspects of being a person, male or female. Number 10, medieval women were suppressed and never expressed dissent or agency. The idea that medieval women were entirely voiceless and passively accepted their fate is a widespread myth that ignores a vast amount of historical evidence. While women in the Middle Ages certainly faced limitations imposed by societal norms, legal structures, and religious doctrine, They frequently found ways to exert agency, express dissent, and influence the world around them in meaningful ways. Their agency was often exercised within existing frameworks, but it was agency nonetheless, proving they were far from silent or invisible. In the legal realm, women were surprisingly active. Historical court records from various regions across Europe consistently show women as plaintiffs and defendants. They sued for property rights, inherited land, defended their reputations, and sought justice for wrongs committed against them. Widows, in particular, often had significant legal autonomy, managing estates, engaging in business transactions, and participating in court proceedings as independent legal entities. Even married women, though legally bound by coverture in some areas, could sometimes act through male proxies or in specific circumstances represent themselves, especially in cases related to their dower rights or personal property. These legal battles, often detailed in surviving court documents, reveal women who were astute, determined, and unafraid to challenge perceived injustices. Politically noble women often wielded considerable influence, particularly as regents for underage sons or absent husbands. A queen, a duchess, or a countess might be responsible for governing vast territories, negotiating treaties, raising armies, and administering justice. As Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women of the High Middle Ages, ruled Aquitaine in her own right, participated in a crusade, and influenced the politics of both France and England. While her case is exceptional in its scope, many other noblewomen across Europe similarly managed their households, lands, and vassals, effectively acting as political leaders. Their letters and charters demonstrate their involvement in everything from diplomatic correspondence to land grants, showcasing their power and decision-making capabilities. And economic agency was another area where women demonstrated significant power. Beyond simply managing the household, women were active participants in the medieval economy. They ran businesses as merchants, innkeepers, brewers, bakers, and craftswomen. In many towns, women were members of guilds, organizations that controlled trade and craft production. These guilds offered women opportunities for economic independence, training, and social networks. Guild records often list women as master craftswomen, apprentices, and business owners. They controlled workshops, employed workers, and participated in market exchanges, demonstrating a clear form of economic agency. Peasant women, too, played a crucial role in agricultural production, often working alongside men in the fields and managing household resources, which were vital to the survival of the family unit. Her religious life offered another pathway for women to express agency and even dissent. The abbesses, the leaders of convents, held significant spiritual, administrative, and economic power. They managed vast landholdings, commanded respect from secular rulers, and provided education and spiritual guidance to communities of women. Mystics like Hildegard of Bingen, Bridget of Sweden, and Catherine of Siena exercised profound spiritual and intellectual influence, often advising popes, kings, and other powerful figures, despite the prevailing patriarchal structures of the Church. Their writings and visions challenged existing norms and provided alternative perspectives, demonstrating intellectual and spiritual autonomy. Even women in secular life could express their spiritual agency through pilgrimages, charitable works, or joining beguine communities, which offered a semi-monastic life outside traditional convents, allowing women more independence. Socially, women were not always quiet. They participated in local protests such as food riots, challenging unfair prices or shortages. They spoke up in village meetings, albeit informally, and their opinions held sway within their communities. While women were often central to the transmission of culture, storytelling, and local traditions, acting as keepers of knowledge and community memory. While direct, overt political dissent might have been dangerous, women found myriad ways to express their dissatisfaction and shape their circumstances, using their social networks, their economic roles, and their spiritual influence. The complex tapestry of medieval society shows women as active, capable, and often defiant agents, navigating their world with skill and determination, far from the passive figures often depicted in modern media. Number 9. All medieval women wore drab, shapeless clothes. The image of medieval women universally draped in shapeless, dull-colored sackcloth is a persistent but wildly inaccurate myth. While the availability of dyes and fabrics varied by social class and geographic location, medieval clothing was often vibrant, highly structured, and fashionable, reflecting the wearer's status, wealth, and regional identity. Far from being drab, medieval garments could be quite elaborate and colorful. Dyeing was a sophisticated art in the Middle Ages. A wide array of natural dyes allowed for a rich palette of colors. The reds were produced from madder root and kermes insects, yielding shades from rust to deep crimson. softer blues came from woad and later indigo, creating hues from pale sky blue to deep navy. Yellows were extracted from weld, saffron, and onion skins. These greens were often achieved by dyeing wool blue, then yellow, resulting in forest greens, mossy greens, and bright lime shades. This purple, derived from rare shellfish or expensive plant dyes, was a color often restricted to royalty and the very wealthy, symbolizing luxury and power. Even the most common colors, when fresh, would have been far from dull. Black and white were also common, often signifying piety or mourning, but they too were produced with care and precision. The fabrics themselves varied significantly. Wool was the most common textile, used by all classes, but it came in many qualities, from coarse, undyed broadcloth for peasants to finely woven, richly dyed worsteds and velvets for the wealthy. And linen, derived from flax, was widely used for undergarments, shirts, and veils due to its breathability and ease of cleaning. Silk, imported from the East, was a luxury fabric reserved for the nobility and clergy, often intricately woven with patterns or embellished with embroidery. Sumptuary laws, which attempted to regulate who could wear what, attest to the desire for display and differentiation through clothing. These laws were frequently enacted precisely because people, including women, were eager to dress above their station and demonstrate their wealth through their attire. The shapes and styles of garments also evolved over the centuries, reflecting changing fashion trends. Early medieval clothing for women tended to be simpler, often consisting of a tunic-like gown worn over a linen shift, sometimes with an outer mantle. As the High Middle Ages progressed, clothing became more fitted and complex. The kirtle, a fitted inner gown, was often worn under an outer gown or surcoat. These outer gowns could be quite elaborate, with wide sleeves, trailing skirts, and decorative lacings or buttons. The Gothic period saw the rise of the high-waisted gown, often with a long, flowing skirt and tight sleeves, creating an elegant, elongated silhouette. Necklines varied from simple round necks to wide, boat-shaped necklines that showed the undershift. Headwear was a particularly prominent feature of medieval women's fashion, especially for married women who were expected to cover their hair. Simple linen wimples and veils were ubiquitous, but these could be draped and pinned in many elegant ways. As the late Middle Ages approached, headwear became increasingly fantastical and elaborate. The horned hennin, a tall, conical hat with a veil draped from its peak, became a symbol of noblewomen's fashion in the Burgundian court. Other styles included elaborate turbans, padded rolls, or intricate networks of pearls and jewels woven into the hair. These were far from plain coverings. They were statements of status, artistry, and fashion. Accessories further enhanced medieval outfits. Belts, often jeweled or embroidered, cinched gowns at the waist or hips. Purses, hung from belts, were often ornately decorated. Brooches, pins, and clasps, made from precious metals or adorned with gemstones, held mantles in place or served as decorative elements. Jewelry, such as rings, necklaces, and earrings, though less common than in some other eras, were worn by those who could afford them. Illuminated manuscripts, effigies on tombs, and surviving archaeological textiles vividly illustrate the rich and varied wardrobe of medieval women. These sources show ladies in gowns of deep blue, vibrant red, emerald green, and sunny yellow, adorned with intricate embroidery, luxurious furs, and sparkling jewels. So far from being uniformly drab, medieval women's clothing was a testament to the era's craftsmanship, artistic sensibilities, and the wearer's personal taste and status. Number 8. Women had no role in warfare or defense. The common movie image of medieval warfare focuses almost exclusively on armored men on horseback or wielding swords, leaving women entirely out of the picture. This portrayal profoundly misrepresents the reality of medieval conflict, where women often played crucial, if varied, roles in both defense and logistical support, and in very rare instances, even on the battlefield. Their involvement might not always have been in direct combat, but it was indispensable to the war efforts of the time. One of the most significant ways women participated in warfare was in the defense of castles and fortified towns. When their husbands or male relatives were away fighting, noble women were frequently left in charge of their strongholds. This was not a ceremonial role. As ladies of the castle, they were responsible for managing the garrison, ensuring supplies were adequate, overseeing repairs to defenses, and maintaining morale. During sieges, these women often took active command. Historical accounts describe countless instances where a noblewoman rallied her defenders, organized the distribution of food and water, directed the firing of defensive weapons, and even negotiated terms with besieging forces. For example, during the Hundred Years' War, numerous English and French noblewomen distinguished themselves in castle defense, displaying remarkable courage and strategic acumen. Philippa of Hainault, Queen of England, famously led the English forces to victory against a Scottish invasion in 1346, while her husband, Edward III, was campaigning in France. While she did not fight on the front lines, her leadership was instrumental. Beyond direct command, women of all social classes played a vital logistical role in supporting military campaigns. They produced and mended clothing, prepared and preserved food, and manufactured essential supplies like arrows, bowstrings, and even some weaponry components. Women often worked in local smithies, making small metal items, or in textile workshops, producing uniforms and banners. On the home front, they managed farms and businesses in the absence of men, ensuring the economic stability necessary to fund ongoing wars. Without this massive logistical and economic support, armies could not have been sustained. While rare, there were indeed instances of women directly engaging in combat. The most famous example is Jeanne d'Arc, a peasant girl who famously led the French army to victory in several battles during the Hundred Years' War. While she is an extraordinary and late medieval case, her story demonstrates that a woman could, under specific circumstances and with divine conviction, command respect and lead men in battle. Other, less well-known examples exist of women taking up arms during sieges or in local skirmishes, often to protect their homes, families, or communities. These might include peasant women defending their villages from raiding parties or urban women participating in the defense of city walls during an attack. Furthermore, women were crucial in providing medical care to wounded soldiers. While some male barber surgeons accompanied armies, women often acted as nurses, healers, and caregivers on the home front, tending to the injured returning from battle. They applied poultices, dressed wounds, and administered herbal remedies, using their traditional knowledge of medicine to alleviate suffering. In camp followers, women often provided essential services, from cooking and laundry to nursing and emotional support, keeping the army functioning. So, while medieval movies often exclude women from the battlefield, historical records reveal a much more complex picture. Whether by leading castle defenses, managing crucial logistical support, or in exceptional cases, taking up arms, women were integral to the conduct and outcome of medieval warfare. Their contributions, though often unsung in popular culture, were undeniable and vital. Number 7. Medieval women had no access to medicine or healthcare beyond folklore. The notion that medieval women relied solely on superstitious remedies or basic folklore for their healthcare is a significant oversimplification. While folk traditions certainly played a role, as they did for men, women in the Middle Ages were deeply involved in a much broader and more sophisticated system of medicine and healthcare, often as practitioners themselves, contributing significantly to knowledge and care. Within the domestic sphere, women were the primary caregivers and medical practitioners for their families and often for their immediate communities. Every household, from peasant cottages to noble castles, relied on the knowledge and skill of its women to deal with illnesses, injuries, and childbirth. This practical knowledge, passed down through generations, included an understanding of herbal remedies, wound dressing, basic bone setting, and diagnostic observation. They cultivated medicinal gardens, prepared salves and poultices, and understood the properties of various plants and natural substances. This was not merely folklore, but a pragmatic, empirically observed system of care that often incorporated effective treatments. Midwifery was an exclusively female profession, and it was highly skilled and essential. Midwives were responsible for assisting women during childbirth, managing complications, and providing prenatal and postnatal care. They possessed specialized knowledge of birthing techniques, the use of birthing chairs, and the treatment of common issues related to pregnancy and infancy. Midwives were respected members of their communities, often serving as trusted advisors and medical experts. Their expertise was crucial given the inherent dangers of childbirth in any era without modern medical interventions. Beyond domestic care and midwifery, some women achieved more formal medical training and recognition. The Medical School of Salerno in southern Italy, a prominent center of medical learning in the early and high Middle Ages, famously admitted women. The most renowned female physician associated with Salerno is Trotula of Salerno, a figure whose work, Diseases of Women, was widely circulated and consulted across Europe for centuries. This text covered a wide range of gynecological and obstetric issues, as well as general medicine, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of anatomy, physiology, and pharmacology. While female physicians like Trotio were rare, their existence proves that formal medical knowledge was not entirely inaccessible to women. Convents also played a crucial role in medieval healthcare. Many convents maintained infirmaries, caring for their own nuns and often for the wider community. Nuns were often literate and had access to medical texts, copying them, and sometimes adding their own observations. They cultivated herb gardens and prepared medicines. Some abbesses and nuns were highly respected for their medical expertise, such as Hildegard of Bingen, who wrote extensively on natural history and medicine, detailing the properties of plants, animals, and minerals for healing purposes. Her works, Physica and Case et Cure, reveal a systematic approach to health and disease that goes far beyond simple folklore. In urban areas, women sometimes worked as apothecaries, selling medicinal herbs and prepared remedies. Some even practiced as barber surgeons, performing minor surgical procedures like bloodletting or setting simple fractures. While less common than male practitioners in these roles, their presence in city records and guild documents shows that their contributions were recognized and regulated. Therefore, the medieval woman's engagement with healthcare was multifaceted. She was often the first line of defense against illness in her home. A skilled midwife, a learned nun in a convent infirmary, or even a formally trained physician in a unique setting. To dismiss their efforts as mere folklore is to ignore the vast body of practical knowledge, formal texts, and dedicated care that women provided throughout the Middle Ages, shaping the health and well-being of their societies. Number 6. All medieval women lived short, brutal lives focused solely on childbirth. The cinematic trope often portrays medieval women as perpetually pregnant, delivering child after child, only to succumb to an early death in childbirth, their lives short and solely defined by reproduction. This portrayal, while acknowledging the very real dangers of childbirth in an era without modern medicine, is an oversimplification that fails to capture the diverse experiences and varied lifespans of medieval women. Many women lived long lives, and their existence encompassed a vast array of roles beyond merely bearing children. Childbirth was indeed a perilous event for medieval women. Maternal mortality rates were high by modern standards, with complications like infection, hemorrhage, and eclampsia often proving fatal. Infant mortality rates were also tragically high. However, it is important to remember that general mortality rates were high for everyone in the Middle Ages, men and women alike, due to disease, famine, and violence. Life expectancy at birth was low, primarily because of high infant and child mortality. If a woman survived childhood and the initial risky years of childbearing, her chances of living into her 40s, 50s, or even 60s increased significantly. Genealogical studies and analyses of skeletal remains show that many medieval women did indeed survive multiple births and live to old age, becoming matriarchs of their families or influential figures in their communities. Beyond reproduction, medieval women had myriad economic roles. In the vast majority of cases, women were active participants in the agricultural economy. Peasant women worked alongside men in the fields, sowing, harvesting, and tending livestock. They were responsible for dairy production, brewing ale, baking bread, and processing food for preservation. Their labor was indispensable to the survival of the family and the community. This was not light work, and it contributed directly to the household's income and sustenance. In urban centers, women were deeply integrated into the craft and trade economies. They ran shops, stalls in markets, and inns. But they worked as weavers, spinners, embroiderers, lace makers, and seamstresses, often producing goods for sale. Women were also common in industries such as brewing, baking, and textile production. Many women, especially widows, managed businesses independently, inheriting their husbands' workshops or starting their own. These guild records from various towns show women listed as master craftswomen, apprentices, and full members, demonstrating their active participation in and contribution to the urban economy. Their lives were certainly not confined to childbearing, but were filled with productive labor and economic activity. For women of the nobility, while childbirth was a risk, their lives were far from solely focused on it. Noble women were responsible for managing vast households and estates. This included overseeing servants, managing finances, organizing supplies, and often administering justice on their lands in their husband's absence. They played crucial roles in political alliances, cultural patronage, and sometimes even castle defense. Their lives were often filled with administrative duties, social engagements, and the education of their children, a complex existence far removed from just being a vessel for new births. Religious life offered an alternative path for women who did not marry or who sought a life of spiritual devotion and intellectual pursuit. Convents were centers of learning, art, and administration where women could become scholars, scribes, artists, and powerful abbesses. These women lived lives of intellectual engagement, spiritual contemplation, and often significant administrative authority, contributing to the cultural and religious fabric of society without necessarily engaging in reproduction. Therefore, while the risks of childbirth were a stark reality, it was not the sole defining characteristic of a medieval woman's existence. Their lives were rich with labor, economic activity, social interaction, and often intellectual and spiritual pursuits. To reduce them to mere birthing machines is to profoundly misunderstand the complex and varied realities of womanhood in the Middle Ages. Number 5. Women were always seen as inherently evil or temptress as Eve. The popular imagination often portrays medieval Christianity as uniformly hostile towards women, reducing them to the archetype of Eve, the temptress responsible for humanity's fall. While elements of misogynistic thought certainly existed within medieval society and some theological discussions did emphasize Eve's role in sin, this is a vastly incomplete and misleading picture. The medieval worldview of women was far more complex and nuanced, encompassing both negative and profoundly positive perspectives, often simultaneously. The powerful cult of the Virgin Mary stands as the most compelling counter-narrative to the sole portrayal of women as corrupt temptresses. The figure of the Virgin Mary, the Mother of Christ, became an increasingly central and revered figure in medieval Christian devotion. She was seen as the antithesis of Eve pure, obedient, compassionate, and the source of salvation through her Son. The cult of Mary blossomed throughout the Middle Ages, becoming one of the most widespread and fervent aspects of popular piety. Cathedrals were dedicated to her. Countless churches contained her altars, and an endless stream of hymns, prayers, and artistic depictions honored her. Pilgrimages to Marian shrines were immensely popular. This intense veneration of Mary provided a powerful, positive model of womanhood, elevating purity, motherhood, and compassionate intercession to the highest spiritual ideals. Women were encouraged to emulate Mary's virtues, and countless women found spiritual strength and identity in her example. Beyond Mary, a multitude of female saints offered diverse models of virtuous and powerful women. Figures like Catherine of Siena, Bridget of Sweden, Clare of Assisi, and Hildegard of Bingen were venerated for their piety, wisdom, courage, and spiritual insights. These saints were not passive figures, they were active, influential women who founded religious orders, advised popes and kings, wrote theological treatises, and performed miracles. Their lives demonstrated that women could achieve spiritual excellence, intellectual prowess, and even political influence within the Christian framework. The widespread veneration of these saints provided tangible examples of female virtue and power that directly contradicted the singular narrative of female weakness or inherent sinfulness. Medieval literature, while sometimes reflecting misogynistic views, also contained numerous examples of women as strong, virtuous, and intelligent characters. Romances and epics often featured noble women who were not just objects of affection but also astute advisors, capable rulers, and figures of moral strength. The allegorical figures of Lady Philosophy or Lady Fortune in philosophical texts presented female personifications of wisdom and destiny. Even secular stories often depicted women as resourceful, clever, and capable of decisive action. Theological debates themselves were not monolithic. While some church fathers and scholars expressed negative views on women, other theologians engaged in more balanced discussions, acknowledging women's spiritual equality and capacity for grace. The emphasis on individual salvation meant that a woman's soul was just as capable of achieving divine favor as a man's. Monastic life offered women a path to spiritual authority and intellectual development, with abbesses holding significant spiritual and administrative power over their communities. Therefore, while the Eve archetype was present, it coexisted with, and was often overshadowed by, the revered figure of Mary and the inspiring examples of numerous female saints. Medieval society's view of women was complex and often contradictory, a blend of traditional patriarchal views and profound spiritual veneration. To claim that medieval women were always seen solely as evil temptresses is to ignore the rich tapestry of spiritual devotion, intellectual engagement, and social roles that empowered and uplifted women throughout the era. Number 4. Women were uneducated and illiterate. The persistent movie image of medieval women as universally uneducated and illiterate, confined to domestic tasks, without access to books or learning, is largely incorrect. While literacy rates were generally lower in the Middle Ages compared to modern times, and access to formal education varied significantly by social class and geographic region, many medieval women were indeed literate and educated, playing active roles in intellectual and cultural life. For aristocratic women, education was often an integral part of their upbringing. And noble daughters might receive tutoring in reading, writing, Latin, arithmetic, and household management. This education was not just for personal enrichment, it was practical. Noble women were often responsible for managing vast estates, overseeing numerous servants, and acting as regents in their husband's absence. These duties required literacy for keeping accounts, managing correspondence, and administering justice. They also learned skills like needlework, music, and sometimes falconry, all considered accomplishments for their status. Many noble women possessed personal libraries, commissioned manuscripts, and acted as patrons of poets, scholars, and artists, demonstrating a keen interest in learning and culture. Royal women, such as Eleanor of Aquitaine or Blanche of Castile, were renowned for their intellect and their patronage of literature and the arts. Convents were major centers of female literacy and learning. For women who chose a religious life, convents offered unparalleled opportunities for education. Their nuns were taught to read and write, often in Latin, the language of scholarship and liturgy. They studied scripture, theological texts, and classical works. Many convents maintained scriptoria where nuns copied and illuminated manuscripts, preserving knowledge and creating beautiful works of art. Some convents were renowned for their intellectual output, producing chronicles, biographies, and theological treatises. Highly educated women, like Rotsvitha of Gandersheim, a 10th century nun, wrote plays, poems, and historical works in Latin, demonstrating a remarkable level of scholarship. Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess, composed music, wrote on medicine and natural history, and advised popes and emperors, all while being a highly literate and intellectually formidable woman. Even outside the nobility and religious orders, some urban women achieved literacy. Women involved in trade and commerce, particularly those who managed shops, market stalls, or inns, often needed basic literacy for keeping accounts, writing letters, and managing transactions. Guilds sometimes offered educational opportunities to their members, including women. While formal schooling was less common for the general population, informal learning within families or through private tutors was possible. Moreover, the definition of literacy in the Middle Ages is important. It was not always a binary can read or cannot read. There was a spectrum of literacy, from basic recognition of one's name or simple phrases to full fluency in multiple languages. Many women might have had practical literacy, sufficient for their daily needs, even if they were not formally trained scholars. The widespread use of picture books and visual aids also suggests that stories and information were accessible even to those with limited textual literacy. The availability of books, while still expensive, increased throughout the Middle Ages, especially with the rise of urban centers and later with the invention of the printing press. Many of these books were not just for men prayer books, devotional texts, and even some secular romances were owned and read by women. The sheer number of illuminated manuscripts depicting women reading or holding books further suggests that female literacy was not an anomaly, but a recognized part of medieval life. In conclusion, while universal literacy was not a reality for anyone in the Middle Ages, it is inaccurate to assume that medieval women were generally uneducated or illiterate. Their access to learning varied, but significant numbers of women, particularly those from noble families or those in religious orders, were highly educated and intellectually engaged, contributing meaningfully to the cultural and scholarly landscape of their time. Number 3, marriage was always forced and loveless, only for alliances. The idea that medieval marriages were universally cold, forced unions, devoid of any affection, solely orchestrated for political or economic gain, is a staple of historical dramas. While it is true that alliances, property, and lineage played a crucial role in marriage arrangements, particularly among the nobility, this portrayal overlooks the complexities of medieval marital practices, the role of mutual consent, and the very real possibility of love and affection developing within these unions. Among the aristocracy and royalty, marriages were indeed often strategic tools for consolidating power, securing peace, or acquiring land. Young noblewomen and noblemen might have little say in their initial betrothal, as their parents or guardians made decisions based on dynastic considerations. Such marriages were essentially business contracts. However, even in these arranged unions, affection could and often did grow over time. Many surviving letters between noble spouses reveal tenderness, concern, and genuine partnership. For example, the letters of the Paston family, a gentry family in 15th century England, show affection, shared decision-making, and concern for each other's well-being between spouses, even within arranged marriages. These marriages were often long-term partnerships requiring cooperation and mutual respect to manage large estates and raise families. For the vast majority of the population, particularly peasants and townspeople, the dynamics of marriage were somewhat different. While parents or community elders might still play a role in guiding choices, young men and women generally had more autonomy in selecting their partners. Proximity, shared work, and personal attraction often played a greater role than grand alliances. Marriages in these social strata were also economic partnerships, requiring both parties to contribute labor and resources for the household's survival. The ability to work together and mutual respect were therefore highly valued. And crucially, medieval church law, which governed marriage across Western Europe, emphasized the importance of mutual consent. According to canon law, a marriage was valid only if both parties freely consented to it, typically exchanged in vows de presenti in the present tense. While parental pressure could be immense, particularly for noble children, a marriage could be annulled if it was proven that consent was coerced. The Church's emphasis on consent provided a legal framework that, at least in theory, protected individuals from entirely forced unions. Secret marriages, contracted solely by the mutual consent of the couple, were also recognized as valid by the Church, though they sometimes led to legal disputes over property or legitimacy. Evidence of affection in medieval marriages can be found in various forms. Love poetry and songs, while often idealized, sometimes reflected genuine marital affection. Tomb effigies often depict married couples lying side by side, sometimes even holding hands, symbolizing their enduring bond. Personal anecdotes and legal records sometimes hint at strong emotional connections between spouses. Wives mourned their husbands, and husbands mourned their wives, expressing grief that goes beyond mere contractual loss. The concept of conjugal love was recognized and, to a degree, celebrated within Christian doctrine, emphasizing mutual respect and companionship within marriage. Furthermore, while the primary purpose of marriage was often seen as procreation, and the orderly continuation of society, companionship, and mutual support were also valued. A good marriage was one in which spouses worked together, raised their children, and supported each other through life's challenges. This kind of partnership naturally fostered a form of affection and loyalty. In summary, medieval marriage was a complex institution influenced by economic, social, and religious factors. While strategic alliances were certainly a feature, especially at the highest levels of society, it is a fallacy to assume that all medieval marriages were loveless or completely forced. Mutual consent was a legal requirement, and affection, companionship, and genuine partnership were often integral components of marital life for many medieval women and men. Number 2. Medieval women had no legal rights or property. The notion that medieval women were entirely stripped of legal rights, akin to chattel and utterly incapable of owning or managing property, is a persistent and damaging misconception. While the legal systems of the Middle Ages were certainly patriarchal and women's rights were often more restricted than men's, a nuanced look at historical records reveals that medieval women, particularly those who were single or widowed, held a surprising array of legal entitlements, including the right to own, inherit, and manage property. One of the most significant legal rights for women in many parts of medieval Europe was the right to dower. Upon her husband's death, a widow was legally entitled to a specified portion, typically 1/3, of her husband's property, including land, income, and goods. This dower was intended to provide for her sustenance and support during her widowhood. Importantly, the dower lands were often hers to manage and profit from independently, even if they would revert to her husband's heirs upon her own death. This gave widows substantial economic and legal autonomy, enabling them to run estates, engage in business, and live independently, often with significant wealth. They could sue and be sued, enter into contracts, and manage their own affairs in a way that married women, under the system of coverture in some areas, generally could not. Inheritance laws varied across regions and social classes, but women often had the right to inherit property, including land and titles, especially in the absence of male heirs or through specific customs. While primogeniture inheritance by the eldest son became more common for landed estates in some regions, many feudal customs allowed for female inheritance, particularly in fragmented lordships. In some areas, daughters could inherit equally with sons, or in certain circumstances, noble women could inherit entire lordships and titles in their own right, becoming powerful landowners and feudal lords. For example, in France, though the Salic law generally barred women from inheriting the throne, it did not prevent women from inheriting and ruling vast duchies and counties. And for single women, whether spinsters or widows, their legal standing was generally that of a finisole, meaning they were legally independent entities. They could own property, conduct business, sign contracts, and represent themselves in court. Many urban women took full advantage of this status, running successful businesses as merchants, brewers, innkeepers, or craftswomen. Guild records often show women as independent business owners, paying taxes, and participating in economic life on their own terms. This legal autonomy was crucial for their economic survival and prosperity. Even married women, whose legal rights were often subsumed under their husbands in systems like common law coverture, where the husband represented the legal identity of the couple, still retained some specific protections and rights. A wife's dower right, for instance, could not easily be alienated by her husband without her consent. She also sometimes had rights to personal property known as paraphernal property, which she brought into the marriage. In some regions, particularly those influenced by Roman civil law traditions, married women retained more distinct property rights and could engage in separate legal actions. And legal documents from the period, including wills, charters, and court records, provide abundant evidence of women owning land, inheriting goods, entering into financial agreements, and pursuing legal cases. These documents paint a picture of women actively participating in the economic and legal life of their communities, managing assets, enforcing contracts, and asserting their rights. Therefore, the portrayal of medieval women as entirely lacking legal rights or property is a significant oversimplification. While their rights were different from those of men and varied by time and place, medieval women were far through dower, inheritance, and the specific legal status of single women. They often held considerable property and wielded significant legal agency. Number 1, medieval women were always passive and confined to the home. The enduring image from popular culture is of medieval women as perpetually passive figures, cloistered within their domestic spaces, never venturing beyond the immediate confines of their home. This static and limited portrayal profoundly misses the dynamic and multifaceted reality of medieval womanhood. Women were active participants in nearly every sphere of medieval life, contributing to the economy, society, and even spiritual movements, often with considerable autonomy and influence. One of the most widespread myths is that women were confined to domestic duties. While household management was certainly a significant role for women of all social classes, it was often far from a passive or isolated activity. For peasant women, their hum extended to the fields, where they labored alongside men in agriculture, tending crops, livestock, and processing food. Their work was essential for the survival of the family and the community, involving strenuous physical labor and vital contributions to the economy. In rural areas, women were active in local markets, selling produce, dairy, or textiles they had produced. In urban centers, women were vibrant participants in public and economic life. They ran shops, taverns, and market stalls, often independently or in partnership with their husbands. Women were heavily involved in various crafts, including weaving, spinning, embroidery, brewing, baking, and dressmaking. They were members of guilds, organizations that controlled trade and craft production, and guild records show women as master craftswomen, apprentices, and business owners. These women managed workshops, hired workers, and participated in trade networks, demonstrating considerable economic agency. Their home was often integrated with their workplace, blurring the lines between domestic and public spheres. They walked the streets, conducted business, and engaged with the wider community. Even for noble women whose home was often a grand castle or manor, their role was far from passive confinement. They were managers of vast estates, overseeing numerous servants, handling finances, maintaining inventories, and often administering justice to the tenants on their lands. When their husbands were away at war or on business, noble women frequently acted as regents, governing their territories, raising armies, and engaging in diplomatic negotiations. These were positions of immense responsibility and public authority, requiring travel, interaction with other lords, and active political engagement. Their lives were filled with administrative duties, social events, and cultural patronage, making them central figures in their local societies. Religious life provided another significant avenue for women to live active, independent lives outside the conventional home. Convents were self-contained communities where women could pursue spiritual devotion, scholarship, and artistic endeavors. Abbesses, the leaders of convents, wielded significant spiritual, economic, and administrative power, managing vast properties, overseeing large communities of women, and often advising secular rulers. Nuns engaged in intellectual pursuits, copying manuscripts, composing music, and writing theological treatises. They lived lives of considerable autonomy, free from the direct control of men, and their communities contributed greatly to medieval culture and learning. Furthermore, medieval women frequently traveled. Pilgrimages to holy sites, both within Europe and as far as the Holy Land, were popular for women of all social classes. Marjorie Kempe, a 15th century English mystic, famously undertook extensive pilgrimages across Europe and beyond, chronicling her spiritual journey and interactions with people from all walks of life. Women also traveled for trade, to visit family, or as part of royal and noble retinues. This disproves the idea of universal confinement. The notion of medieval women as merely passive figures confined to the home is a gross simplification. They were integral, active, and often powerful agents in their society, contributing to the economy, managing complex households and estates, leading religious communities, and engaging in the public life of their times. Their roles were diverse and dynamic, shattering the narrow cinematic stereotype.